Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the City of Los Angeles's 2023 to 2028 Assessment of Fair Housing Session on Disability, Mental Health, and Housing. We are happy to have this discussion today, and we look forward to hearing from all of you who are key stakeholders and service providers in your field. I am Nancy Tuamaquaboa with the Los Angeles Housing Department, and I'm also joined by other LHD staff who will go ahead and introduce themselves now.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Joel Montano with the Los Angeles Housing Department here with you all this morning and to hear the valuable input that you'll all be providing. And I'll pass it to the next staff.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mike O'Brien, also with the Housing Department. Thanks so much for joining.
Great, thank you. We also have staff representing the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, also known as HACLA. So I will now allow them to introduce themselves. Do we have
Good
any?
morning. I'm sorry, I was muted. Good morning, everyone. My name is Serena Cannon. I'm bus person for HACLA.
Great, thank you, Serena. I will now turn it over to Mosaic Community Planning, who is partnering with LAHD and HACLA in developing the city's 5-year assessment of fair housing plan. They will be facilitating our discussion today, and they will start with a presentation. And they will also begin with their introductions.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. I'm Melissa Mayu with Mosaic Community Planning, and I'll do a brief overview of the fair housing study that we're working on, and then we'll get into a discussion. We also have a couple other members of Mosaic here today as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeremy Gray with Mosaic, and I'll be assisting with the facilitation of our discussion.
Hello, I'm Madison Hughes with Mosaic. I'm an associate planner, and I will be taking notes and also providing questions in the chat in case you would like to read those.
Thanks. Maybe before we get started, if folks who have joined us would like to maybe take themselves off mute and do a quick introduction of their name and if they represent an organization, that would be great just to get an idea of who we have with us today.
Hi, I'm Doris Wise. I'm with the Eastern Los Angeles Regional Center.
Hi, my name is Lisa Cypress. I'm a housing specialist with San Gabriel Pomona Regional Center.
Hi, good morning. I'm Norma Duenas. I'm a community services specialist at Eastern Los Angeles Regional Center.
Good morning. I'm Jean Galliana. I'm the Older Adult System Coordinator at LASA.
Hi, I'm Angelina Zargorian, ombudsperson with Section 8.
Hey, Angelina. Anyone else? Or if you'd like to leave your name and organization in the chat, that works too. I think we might also have some other city staff here as well from different departments.
Hi, I'm Angie Rubio. I'm the program manager for Alliance for Housing and Healing.
Good morning. I'm Crystal Gunn from the Accessible Housing Program of the Los Angeles Housing Department.
Thanks, Crystal.
Hi, I'm Yesenia Akers. I'm the South Bay Regional Director for Alliance for Housing and Healing.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lucia Choi. I'm a staff attorney with the Civil Rights Practice Group of Disability Rights California.
Nice. Well, thank you, everyone. We're glad to have this meeting with you today and really look forward to a discussion about fair housing and housing affordability and accessibility. Before we do that, I'll do a little bit of an introduction about the project that we're working on. So what we're doing is called an assessment of fair housing, or AFH. And through this project, we'll analyze the fair housing landscape in the city of Los Angeles, essentially looking at whether all residents are able to access housing that is suitable for them and free from unlawful discrimination. We'll also look at how well people are able to access different community resources and opportunities depending on where they live. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development requires any city or county that receives HUD grants for community development or affordable housing to complete these types of studies every 5 years. And additionally, as of 2018, the state of California also has a requirement that public agencies, including cities, counties, and housing authorities, prepare fair housing assessments. Generally, what we're talking about when we talk about fair housing is everyone's right to participate in the housing market. So to own, sell, purchase, rent the housing of their choice without fear of unlawful discrimination. That includes things like renting or buying a home, obtaining insurance, having access to home loans, and having fair property appraisals. So kind of everything that goes along with obtaining housing or enjoying it once you are living there. Under the Federal Fair Housing Act, everyone is protected from housing discrimination based on race or ethnicity, color, religion, national origin, sex, family status, and disability. Additionally, the state of California has a series of laws that expanded fair housing protection to several more protected classes that you see listed there. So marital status, age, ancestry, immigration status, language, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, genetic information, your source of income, so things like a housing choice voucher, veteran or military status, occupation, and other arbitrary factors. And in addition to these, not on this slide, but the city of LA also has additional protected classes relative to housing. And that includes employment status, so whether or not you're employed, language, and and whether or not you're a citizen. In 2015, HUD adopted a new fair housing regulation called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing that called on cities and counties to take meaningful actions to overcome patterns of segregation, foster inclusive communities, reduce affordable housing need, and address barriers to access to opportunity in their communities. So really taking a more expansive look at the role that housing plays within communities, thinking about how where you live impacts your ability to access things like good schools, good jobs, transit, grocery stores, healthcare facilities, and a clean environment. This regulation said that cities need to consider whether everyone has equal access to neighborhoods with these types of opportunities, regardless of their race, ethnicity, or other protected class. So HUD has a long-standing fair housing protections, but the 2015 regulation really put in place a stronger framework to ensure that those were being implemented by cities and counties. Under the Trump administration, HUD pared back its AFH rule, essentially suspending the requirement to conduct a fair housing study. So cities were no longer required to really do a thorough evaluation of their fair housing. But then early in the Biden administration, the rule was reinstated, requiring up-to-date fair housing studies. And then last month, HUD released a new proposed rule that would further define what those studies should contain. So as you can see, there's been a lot of evolution nationally at the fair housing landscape nationally over the last several years. And we are keeping an eye on this draft rule as we are preparing this study to see what impact it may have on it. So our AFH will include a variety of components. We'll be looking at demographics and patterns related to residential segregation, integration, and income. We'll identify areas of the city with high levels of racial segregation, including those with high levels of poverty and high levels of affluence. We'll also look at access to opportunities like schools, jobs, transit, a clean environment, and whether everyone throughout the city has fair access to those types of resources. We'll consider housing costs and whether affordable housing need varies by protected class. We'll also look at public housing, tax credit developments, and other types of affordable housing. So seeing what is available and in what parts of the city. And then finally, the study will include a summary of key fair housing issues, along with goals and strategies to address them over the next 5 years. Community input, including the input that we'll get from you today, will be a really important part of this study. It will really inform all of these components. So in addition to meeting state and federal requirements, the AFH will also be important as local leaders make decisions about housing policies and resources. It will be built on community input and is one way residents can voice their opinions to city and HACLA leadership. The study will advance past fair housing efforts, including the city's housing element and its previously completed AFH that was done in 2018. Ultimately, what will come out of the plan is really an action-oriented strategy that can impact the city's decisions about how to spend grant funds that it receives for community development, housing, and homelessness. But the strategies will also shape other projects, programs, or policies by the city and HACLA. The final plan will be adopted by City Council and HACLA leadership and represent their commitments to implement activities that expand fair housing and stop future housing discrimination for all residents. And to give you an idea of some of the things that have come out of past fair housing studies the city has done, that would include things like the city's laws around source of income protection, the city's tenant anti-harassment ordinance, and eviction prevention efforts like Stay Housed LA and others. So you can kind of get a sense of what has been done in the past, what's come out of it, and hopefully this study will build on those efforts and expand them to continue to address fair housing issues. So you can see from this outline that we'll have quite a few opportunities for public input during the AFH process. That includes this meeting and other similar meetings that we've done this month, along with a series of community-wide meetings that we did at the end of last year, and focus groups that we are doing, particularly with residents likely to be impacted by fair housing issues, also during March. In the summer, we'll hope to hear from you again to get feedback on the draft fair housing issues and strategies to address them. And then later in the summer, we anticipate having a complete draft assessment for the public to review. So we hope you will stay involved in the process and continue to give us input about as we refine the study further and identify strategies and things like that. Then finally, we'll make any last revisions to prepare for a fall approval of the plan by City Council and HACLA. So at this point, I'd like to stop for a minute and take any questions that you may have about the plan, about fair housing in general, or kind of about our process for doing this study. And then we'll get into a discussion. Any questions that anyone has? Well, if not, then I think we can get into our discussion. I'll just start by mentioning that So you can raise your hand if you have a comment. We would definitely encourage you to provide those out loud. I think that helps us discuss and build on ideas. But if you're not able to do that, you can put them in the chat as well. We also have a SurveyMonkey form, which Madison will put a link to in the chat. So if you have input about these questions that were on the agenda that you're not able to share, or that you think of 2 days from now, we have a way for you to share those. If you use that SurveyMonkey form, it will be open for several days after the meeting. So feel free to continue to provide input, even if you're not able to during the meeting. And then lastly, I think we might have had a couple people join us by phone. So if you did join by phone, if you would like to raise your hand, you can use *9, and you can use *6 to mute and unmute. But with that, I will stop sharing my screen so that we can get into the discussion, which Jeremy will lead.
Hi, good morning again, everyone. So thanks again for being here. And as Melissa and Nancy both shared, the main purpose of our meeting today is for us to hear from you. So thank you for listening through the presentation. Maybe you learned something from that, but what we'd like to do now is turn to a few discussion questions that we have. And the first of those, we kind of begin here looking at the City of LA's 2021 to 2029 housing element, which identified an acute shortage of affordable housing for people with disabilities. That includes larger units suitable for families with a person with a disability or people with disabilities who have a live-in aid. So recognizing that a range of housing types is needed to meet the variety of needs and preferences among people with disabilities, our question for you is, do you think there are particular accessible housing types for which there is a greater need in the City of LA? So if you would like to answer that, let's try this. You can go ahead and just unmute yourself and provide a response. If that ends up being too much, we can go back to raising hands, but let's start with that. So feel free, anybody who would like to share, go ahead, and we'd love to hear how you'd answer that. I see a hand. Serena, so would you like to start with that one?
Yes, I would. I do see that there is a greater need as more people more than not are becoming disabled or having mental health challenges because of a lot of things that are happening and impacting them. Basically, they're not having any place to live. And many of the families are unable to afford units because they are a large family. Based upon our rents here in the City of Los Angeles, a family of 4 really can't afford a 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom apartment, and they only probably have enough income for a 2-bedroom, and they can't because they're considered overhoused. So many of the folks in those situations have persons with disabilities in their family, and they're trying to navigate that issue in terms of having enough housing rooms, or I guess to accommodate the family. And many of those folks have a disabled family member, maybe 1 or 2 people, and many times there are children who are disabled as well. So that's what I'm seeing, a lot of children with either mental health disabilities or physical disabilities, and more disabled families having a problem trying to access housing because of their limited income.
Okay, thank you, Serena. Appreciate that answer. Lucina?
Yes, hi. Good morning. I'm Lucina Colars, and I work at San Gabriel Pomona Regional Center. We're one of 7 regional centers of LA County. So I see some of my counterparts are here today. I hope they don't mind me speaking on their behalf. They are actually more in the City of LA than we are. We have Eastern Los Angeles Regional Center, South Central Los Angeles Regional Center, North LA County Los Angeles Regional Center, West Side Regional Center, and Frank T. Lannerman Regional Center. Harbor Regional Center, I think, is more in the Long Beach, Torrance area. But those other 5 regional centers are part of LA City. And so there's a couple of things. The issue of our families from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who have children with disabilities or family members with disability, there is a need for housing because many of them can't work because they're taking care of their disabled family member or disabled child. And so their income is limited. In addition to that, we have adults with developmental disabilities. And one of the things that's lacking for us is being able to be part of the multifamily housing development, where there are set asides for people with mental health issues, set aside for people who are homeless, set aside for people who are aging, set aside for people who have low income. Our individuals either get Social Security disability or Social Security from their parents. So it's SSI or SSA, but the amounts monthly are very low. And one of my coworkers is Lisa, has her hand raised. So if I miss anything, I want her to add in. The amount is $1,100 a month. If you're on SSA, you don't qualify for CalFresh. If you're on SSI, you qualify for CalFresh, but it's still very limited. And you know, with the rents in LA City and LA County, it's impossible for us to find housing for them. There are no vouchers. None of the cities are offering them. It's long wait lists. And so a lot of times we're eliminated from the multi-housing development and from low-income vouchers and housing. There aren't set asides for our population. And so our adults who want and can live independently because they have the ability, and we have support services to help them as many hours as they need to cook, to clean, to learn how to shop, to maintain their lives in terms of self-care. We don't need an additional service for that. It's included in how we provide services. So we feel that we're a population that hasn't been served fairly in the housing department. So I do have a couple of counterparts. I have Lisa and I have Doris, who's, you know, I hope you don't mind me speaking on behalf of LA City, Laura Doris, but.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And I think, so affordability, of course, and I think we'll continue to hear and discuss that as an issue. Just wanted to also ask if there are, in addition to affordability, if there are particular housing types. So what does housing for some of these populations look like that you feel like is missing? So housing for people with mental disabilities or developmental intellectual disabilities. So those sorts of housing types, that's information that is important to us too. Lisa, would you like to respond next?
I'm sure, yeah, just to add to it, what Lucina's stating, you know, in regards to housing types, senior housing is pretty unavailable in regards to what's there. But multifamily housing, individual units, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms. One issue that we find a lot is accessibility for consumers that are non-ambulatory. So for instance, if there's affordable housing and a voucher on a second floor for somebody that's in a wheelchair, it is not safe for them to be there. And we run into a lot of difficulties with that. Another difficulty we have with our consumers with the vouchers is if they have a live-in aid, sometimes, and we're not talking about the supports that regional center puts in place, but sometimes it might be a family member or somebody that's collecting in-home support services. And the income limits, just because they are helping them out, sometimes that's counted in the voucher that has them dequalified for that voucher. So some of those things are definitely problematic in trying to maintain affordable housing for our consumers.
I'd like to, if you can, Jeremy, Doris Weiss is from Eastern Los Angeles Center. She's sort of the same conversation we have. She's one of my counterparts at another regional center.
Okay, yeah, hi.
It seems like Carrie has had her hand raised for some time.
Okay.
Hey, hello. So something that I've noticed, but I hesitated to bring it up because I think there may be someone who has better data than I have no data, but this is what I've noticed anecdotally, that there seems to be a mismatch between the income eligibility of a lot of the accessible subsidized units and the income level of the people looking for those units. I've had a number of people that I've sent to to apply to places. And because they're looking for physical, accessible units for people with mobility disabilities, and their income is too low. And then at the same time, I've had the managers, back when we used to do the trainings in, in person, I'd have a lot of feedback from the people managing the affordable housing, that had funding through the city. And they would say, we can't find enough people for our accessible units that meet the income requirements, because the income requirements were more, I forget, but it was, I don't know if it was low or median, whereas a lot of people looking for the accessible units were extremely low and very low. But I would think if you talk to a number of the housing coordinators and psychiatric social workers that are in the business of actually placing, you might be able to get good data, which I cannot provide you. And the only other comment I have with regard to the question being posed right now is I've also heard a lot of desire for accessible units on the first floor. And it's really disheartening to have to explain to people that because of fair housing laws and how they've developed, developers have to make sure that the accessible units are placed throughout the building and not concentrated on the first floor, where, according to the people I've spoken to for the last 19 years, there's a lot of desire to have accessible units on the first floor. And so it seems like the law itself is an impediment to that. And there's another area where the law itself is an impediment, but I can't speak to it off the top of my head. Maybe I'll put it in the Survey Monkey.
Thank you, Carrie. That's helpful. I appreciate you raising the issue of that mismatch too. Doris, did you want to share?
Yeah, I thank you so much, Carrie, for that comment. We try to get consumers into tax credit finance buildings. Consumers, what we call our clients, the individuals with developmental disabilities, and they have 5-7 years of history of being able to pay $750 a month with a roommate, or $900, which is like almost all of their check, and then they're going to food banks and accepting dinner invitations from their family or whatever to get through to the end of the month. And then they go to a tax credit building and the rent will be $600, which would be great relief for them, and they can't qualify. And so something around income limits for people, they're usually on a Social Security benefit. Medi-Cal pays their health insurance. So, somebody not with that kind of benefits would need more income. But also, IHSS is paying for some of their care, and regional center services are generally at no cost to the consumer who's living in their own apartment. And we might even pick up some transportation costs, which would be a cost to a typical person, non-disabled person. But a lot of our clients don't drive, or even if they can drive, they can't afford a car in Los Angeles. So we pick up their bus pass or their access. So I think there is the means to be in these affordable buildings, and I know they don't want to be slumlords and be extracting, more than 50% or 50% of the person's income, but that's something that we would like looked at. And then, yeah, there's always the frustration of, well, we couldn't put all the accessible buildings on the first floor because we can't segregate. And this is a unit that is accessible for wheelchairs, deaf and hard of hearing, and blind. And so you've got all of that accessibility like squished into one unit. And there may be people with that disability profile, but for a regional center, those are not the consumers who want to live independently. And so spreading out the accessible unit so that there's more availability, I think would help as well.
Okay. Thank you, Doris. I want to continue to follow this this thread to a similar related question. So we're thinking here about barriers to access for housing for people with disabilities. So I want to continue hearing about those sorts of things. And add to that too, though, thinking about like housing discrimination complaints from people with disabilities. What sorts of discriminatory issues might be most prevalent do you hear about? Do your clients relate to you? So continuing to think about barriers, but also what sorts of housing discrimination do you see reported among your constituents and the clients that you work with? Lucia?
Hi, good morning. Before we discuss discrimination, I also wanted to raise sort of the accessibility issues that people commented on, especially for folks who want first floor units. I think part of the issue with folks, well, a part of the issue that may contribute to folks wanting first floor units is there's what we see like a prevalent issue with elevators breaking down all the time in buildings in Los Angeles. I don't know if it's because the housing stock in LA tends to be older, but we receive a lot of, clients calling us about elevator issues in buildings. And so people with mobility disabilities are like trapped in their units for hours, sometimes days, and where they live on like second or third floor buildings. So I just wanted to raise that before moving on to discrimination. Things we're seeing a lot on the ground is issues with emotional support animals and landlords giving tenants a hard time with RAs on ESAs. There is a state law that passed in early 2022, I believe, where it has nothing to do with like housing, but where if therapists or other mental health providers are providing a verification letter for an ESA or a support letter, then they are required to have there's language about requiring a therapeutic relationship for at least 30 days. And we're seeing a lot of landlords using that law to ask for pretty private and invasive information from the tenants. So asking for specific psychiatric diagnosis and things like that, and medical records, even though that's, not allowed by fair housing rules. We're seeing other RA denials quite frequently. And then we're also seeing screening issues, so rental applicant screening issues. A lot of landlords in LA and across the state still use credit reporting agencies, and where that can really have a severe negative impact on protected classes, including for people with disabilities. We're also seeing still criminal history records being sought and utilized for rental screening purposes. We're seeing rental history requirements. So asking for at least 2 or 3 years of rental history. But, we're seeing people with disabilities living with their family, so they're not really necessarily paying rent to a landlord, or maybe they were unhoused, so they don't have that rental history. So we're seeing a lot of issues with rental screening as well. And I'll stop there and let other people provide feedback.
Thank you. Those are some important ones that you raised. I appreciate it. Ivy, I see your hand.
Yes, hi. I would just like to reaffirm what was said earlier about the unaffordability of housing with that provides some disability accommodations. I would say that's class discrimination right there. In Chinatown, I've seen market rate luxury apartments that have wider hallways or working elevators, but literally across the street would be a 16th floor senior housing built for people who are often very disabled, but they constantly experience like the broken elevators that's been named before. And I know elders who prefer to live in single residence occupancy units where the rent is $400 and they are still rent burdened. And these buildings are not at all accessible. The hallways are very narrow, or there's no in-unit bathrooms for tenants with limited mobility. And the housing conditions and the landlord abuse are so terrible that they lead to more trauma and mental health issues like PTSD and suicidal ideation. But the tenants try to make peace with what they have because they don't think they deserve better, or the landlords don't treat them better, or the landlords don't respond to repair requests because they are discriminating the tenants for being poor in a sense. So I just wanted to bring it back to how being proactive about abusive or neglectful landlords and class discrimination would be important too.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate you raising those considerations. Thank you, Ivy. Doris, I see your hand again.
Thank you. For discrimination, we've had people who have guessed that the tenant applicant has autism or is on the autism spectrum disorder, and have asked inappropriate questions about that. But recently we've seen just a lot of applications that get lost, and our consumers are turning in the application 2 and 3 times. And you know, I think it's something that we've talked to the consumer and family about housing discrimination advocacy, and that they could potentially file a case. And they, and I don't know, maybe some of the other regional center staff can confirm this, but they don't want to make waves. They don't want to complain, and that the unwillingness to advocate for themselves and to go along. And they're very extremely low income, puts them in a bad position with landlords, and they just don't get their repairs done. I'm not sure if that's within this study, but and then the landlord will get tired of it and you know, basically raise the rent by $300, and that's it. So people who have made a single family home accessible and to meet their needs, the landlords are reluctant to keep working with Section 8 because of complaints about the inspectors that 1 year they'll come through and they'll say, this is the wrong kind of screens, they have to be different, you have to switch them out. And then the next year, the next inspector will say, those are the wrong kinds of screens, you have to switch them out. And so we've had consumers who have to use their own storage space for the screens because the landlords know that the inspectors are going to play this over and over and over. And so I think there's an issue with the application process and just subtly steering, or maybe you want to go to this complex down the street that would better fit. And then also the people making assumptions about people on the autism spectrum being dangerous or setting fires or things that stereotypes.
Okay. Thank you.
I'll just add those, the things you're mentioning, Doris, are definitely within the scope of this study. And I think things that we've heard in some other meetings as well, as far as kind of some discrimination that folks face as they're trying to apply places, and then sometimes even once they're living there, like you mentioned, and I think Ivy mentioned as well, maybe harassment or issues folks are facing that they don't want to make waves about. And then the more you ask, kind of the more likely you might face a rent increase or something like that. So yeah, definitely issues that we want to talk about. So thanks.
Lucia, would you like to share again?
Yes, sorry if I'm taking up too much time, but I just wanted to also lift up what Doris said about the sort of stereotypes people may have of people with disabilities, including landlords and neighbors, and how that can lead to evictions based on nuisance. So in really across the state, we're seeing a lot of landlords serve tenants with eviction notices based on nuisance activity, and a lot of that is sometimes very vague and overbroad, and based on really stereotypes that people with disabilities are dangerous, or a nuisance to their neighbors or to the landlord or to the property manager. And I know, part of like the AFH process is to see if there's any laws or regulations in place in Los Angeles that may be an impediment to fair housing. I believe Los Angeles is one of the cities that have a crime-free ordinance. And those can be potentially very harmful for tenants with disabilities, tenants of color. And so I just wanted to lift that up as well.
Great. Yeah, thank you for making that point. I want us to think a little bit, so going back a little to the first question that we discussed about housing types that would be, that are most needed to serve households that contain someone with a disability. And the question there being, what can the city or what can HACLA be doing to encourage production of those types of housing? There's the 2019 Voluntary Compliance Agreement, the goal of the 4,000 affordable units in covered housing developments. So that's there. But in addition to that, what are some things that the city of LA or HACLA can be doing? Those housing types that you mentioned earlier, so larger size units to accommodate a live-in aid or first floor units. We've talked about that a good bit. So what can be done to encourage production of those? Carrie.
So I think regarding the comment that I made with the income eligibility and the income, what people have as income, the mismatch, I think we would need to have a study to see what is, and I don't know exactly how to do it, but I'm sure other people do, but showing what is the demand for the kind of moderate or lower income versus low and very low units. What is the demand? And I don't know if it's too late to work that into the settlement agreement as an addendum, or I don't know if it's coming more from the LITCH, the state level, but that's the only solution I see for that. And then tweaking what we're requiring. And it may be a matter of fewer units would have to be built because there'd be greater subsidies. Basically, what we're asking for is greater subsidies. And then I want to agree with Lucia Choi about the elevator problem. That definitely, in my experience, what I've seen exacerbates the need or the desire for the first floor units to be the accessible ones. I don't think it completely explains it because the elevators will always be a problem in case of fire or earthquake, but it's definitely made much worse by what seems to, because I've looked into it, seems to be a nationwide shortage of elevator repair people. And then there's also problems with finding parts because I don't know if it has something to do with the elevator industry, but it can be, there's a lot of different kinds of elevators with a lot of different kinds of parts. And it can, I mean, I've had people report they're looking in different states for various parts. And so these elevators are staying broken for a very long time. And that I think would have to be addressed also on a national level. I think it was Herbert Hoover who tried to standardize our general electric things, cords and outlets and whatnot. I think we need something of that nature for elevators, but I don't know what the city can do about it. But those are my thoughts.
Okay, appreciate that. I saw in the chat a comment that there are lots of existing incentive programs for affordable housing. Why not just replicate some of those, but instead target accessible housing? And I think I just wanted to note that we are seeing comments that you're adding in the chat, so we're following those along too. So thank you to those of you who are commenting there. Crystal?
Yeah, just to address the elevator issue on a solution for that. I know that we're dealing with trying to, when we have individuals with disabilities in higher floor units that, have elevator issues, is trying to get vouchers to relocate them temporarily to like a hotel. And so they're not living fearfully, trapped, they can't get out when these elevators are taking an extended period of time for repairs. So we're looking like, it's not uncommon for it to take up to 2 weeks for elevator repairs. And if we had some type of program, the city did, that would allow these individuals to be housed safely and, with some type of voucher, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good addition. Thank you.
I didn't raise my hand, but Gail Salter here, San Pedro Mental Health Clinic. First and foremost, good morning to each and every one of you. It's an honor to be among my peers. I'm going to answer your question, Jeremy. We need more communication, public announcements, and leaders that are going to communicate the truth. We don't have enough clarity to what's actually law versus not reality. I've been doing housing. I'm not going to brag. Yeah, I am. I've been doing it for 17 years. And I love giving kindness and love unconditional to the people I serve. I have such amazing testimony to transformations, and I'm the first in line to share with each one of you here today to remind you. In 1977, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge ruled that I would never be fit to live in society ever again. So I went to the streets. I got hooked on heroin, crack. I had one bottle of white wine rose in one pocket and a bottle of red in the other, living in 20 degrees below zero, homeless for 7 years, living on the streets where I'm from, Wilmington. 1986 was known as the highest rate of homicides gang-related in the nation. That's where I came up from, the projects, Dana Strand, owned by the federal government, AKA HACLA. My story today is that recovery is possible, and I don't care what the situation looks like. I get to work with the most complicated, most difficult clients that we have on the streets. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? I get them housed, and they are no longer in survival mode. They are now living in a thriving mode. I'm going to end with this because you guys can already sense my passion. Thank you. Let's have a fun day.
Thank you, Gail. I appreciate the words of encouragement there too.
From the chat, Jean also shared, I think something that goes along with Gail's comments, that there oops, sorry, just the prevalence of disability among folks who are unhoused. So as of the 2022 homeless count, there are currently about 5,500 unhoused adults, 55 and older, living with a disability. So unhoused seniors with a disability, and that HUD estimates the total total unhoused population, 40% are living with a disability. Thanks, Jean, for leaving those comments.
It's really easy to leave out the unhoused population when we're talking about housing for people with disabilities. So I'm happy that you noted that.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Jeremy, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but when people with a disability, especially those in wheelchairs and walkers, are on other than the first floor, the concern is how do they get out in case of an emergency? Those ladders aren't going to work for them. They're very fragile. You can hurt somebody with cerebral palsy if you move them the wrong way, especially if they're, because a lot of people with cerebral palsy, many of them, they can be cognitively, they may not be disabled cognitively. They may have, intellectual, they may not have an intellectual disability, but the cerebral palsy affects their body. And so, getting them off the second floor or third floor, it could be very dangerous for them. And so if they don't have the first floor, we can't really wholeheartedly agree for them to be on the second and third floor, because we'd be having nightmares every night thinking, how are they going to get out? What's going to happen in case of fire? Who's going to take them out? What if they break their bones? It just doesn't seem something doable for us.
Yeah. Okay. No, it's an important issue, and you're doing a good job of making that, getting that point across. So thank you for sticking on that. I want to ask a question now about the city's affordable and accessible housing registry, the AAHR. How well do you think that registry is working? Are there improvements that you think the city could make to it?
I don't think I've ever heard of it. Have you, Doris?
I have, and I wonder if our vendor service providers are taking enough advantage of that. So I think one thing regional centers could do is to put a little effort into marketing that feature. And I know the city sends me, not the city, but projects that have had city money invested in them send me notifications when there's an accessible waitlist opening. And so I think that part of it is working. And I know the regional centers are on the list of resources as well. So I think that's part of that same registry.
Do you have to live in the city of LA to be in that registry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, anyone else with knowledge of that registry or experience having used it?
I've used the registry for folks, refer them to that, but I'm not sure of any of the outcomes if they've actually were able to get into those buildings. Many times they have a lot of waiting lists. So it's really unclear if it's actually, folks are actually getting housed that way.
Okay. Thank you, Serena. And Carrie?
So I think I agree with Serena. I think that the issue isn't so much that people can't find the housing as that there just isn't enough. And so I think the registry is definitely a good thing, but I don't think it's, I don't think it was a solution to the actual main problem, which is not enough housing. But I wanted to ask if there, do you have people in this meeting who are managers of these housing projects. Because they would have what we're missing is knowing how many of these units are sitting vacant because they can't find people who are eligible. Because back before COVID, I got a lot of reports from people, and I don't know numerically how many units were vacant, but some of the funding source requirements for eligibility were so complicated that they would go up and down the state sometimes looking for a family that was large enough with the right income, with the right, disability, and they couldn't find anyone. And then there's all these other people who desperately need it and they're not eligible. So I think that if we don't have that's something that maybe Mosaic could help with, organizing some of these managements to get input from them. How many units per 10 or per 100 are vacant, and for how long are they vacant? And what are the reasons for those vacancies? That's the puzzle piece that we need, and that I don't have, and I don't know who does.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good question. Are there people in our group here, or if Melissa or someone from the city knows that want to speak up to that?
Yeah, we don't track vacancy in the city, unfortunately, and that is something that we understand is a need in terms of knowing what's available in regards to all housing, all affordable housing. And of course, those specifically for those with special needs, those with any type of physical or mental disability. So we don't track that. And it is something that has been in discussion as far as even potential to even require vacancy reports to be provided, and for something for the city to collect and even consider as far as a ballot initiative, which did not happen. So we understand that, and it is something that's on a larger level in terms of the city being able to track that. But in terms of those units that are particularly posted for availability in terms of affordable housing units, just at the level in which people are searching for, within a registry, if it beyond even accessibility registry, right? Something in which we have owners and landlords who are able to post their units, post their properties, or post which units are vacant in their properties is something that we have talked about, and something as far as a further expansion of the affordable housing or the accessible housing registry, expanding that. And so there is a need for that on that level. And it is something in which further discussion needs to take place. But we understand that is definitely a need to be able to know what's vacant, what's available, so people are able to know how to go and search for housing, and they know how what's available in terms of the areas in which they want to live. So that is something that is under consideration, and perhaps something that something that could definitely be included as part of our strategy for our AFH plan.
Good, thank you, Nancy. Carrie, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah. So Nancy, I wasn't sure from what you said if this would be limited just to the affordable housing or for the whole housing stock, but I wanted to just to point out that a lot of people there's some suspicion that some larger landlords may be holding a lot of units vacant, which keeps the prices up. And I don't know, I don't know if it's just a rumor, a suspicion, if there's any truth behind it, but if there were to be some kind of study or rules on vacancy, how many vacancies you can allow, whatever, it gets pretty gnarly, but that it be larger than solely the accessible units or even the affordable units, but to the whole housing stock, because the more units are available, the less the landlords have the ability to discriminate. It puts the tenants in, it alters the balance of power between tenants and landlords. So that's my suggestion.
Right. So yes, thank you for that, Carrie. So yes, so what I was speaking of in terms of the larger universe of units in the city, in terms of being able to one, track what those vacancies are, where are they at, and even perhaps charging a fee for those units that remain vacant is something that has been discussed, and it was under consideration and did not happen in terms of a potential ballot measure. So for example, a vacancy tax for units. And that is something that is, the department, LHD, did do a report on that. And it didn't, so we do have an initial report on that in terms of different sources we looked at in data in terms of utility companies and also postal service in terms of what is being tracked in terms of vacancy and what do we have, right? And what can we say in terms of what the vacancies look like? And then even going forward and really being able to really understand what is our vacancy level at, and then really being able to be able to charge fees for these units that are remaining vacant or not being leased up, as you said, because there is a need, right? And so that is something that did not move forward, but I can share with you, if it's helpful, a link to a report that we did do on it. But this is something, again, that is at a level that, hopefully will continue to move forward and become something that is becomes an actual initiative. There are different cities and jurisdictions that have vacancy taxes, but LA is not one of them, unfortunately. But I'll share with you the report that we did just as background.
When Melissa was presenting earlier, one of the subjects that she mentioned was access to opportunity. And so thinking about things like transit, quality schools, good jobs, support services, access to city and county funded facilities. So related to that, in the city's current housing element, there is some analysis of the locations of accessible housing units within the city. And that analysis found that most accessible housing units in LA are in multifamily developments, and that those are concentrated in downtown LA, in neighborhoods west of downtown, and in parts of the San Fernando Valley. So considering those three geographies, what does that mean for access to community assets and resources? So people with disabilities tend to live in accessible housing in those places. How does that affect access to things like transit and quality schools, good jobs, support services, et cetera? Are those types of amenities available in those neighborhoods? Are they less available than they might be in other neighborhoods if accessible housing was distributed differently across the city?
You're speaking for all of LA County, correct?
Particularly the city of LA.
Just the city? Okay, so there are so many services. When a client, individual or family, they have Medi-Cal, depending on the HMO attached, if it's straight Medi-Cal, it's all a benefit because they do provide transportation, Lyft drivers to and from appointments. Access, another big transportation that we utilize. This is made 24 hours in advance. They will come and pick up the client and also take them to and from their appointments. And I believe even they can go to the grocery store, etc. I also want to highlight in-home supportive services throughout LA City. As well, and there's Social Security benefits, there's CBEST for that, Department of Public Health. I cannot highlight all the many services that we provide for Los Angeles City residents. If they happen to be a client of DMH, we provide a gamut of various services, and especially linkage to resources to provide even more collaborative hands on their for their support, so that, the goal is to enrich others' lives, to educate, to raise awareness, and provide those caring services that are going to enable and empower this person. And so with that said, I did want to also highlight HACLA and is this LASA, Jeremy? Are you LASA or?
No.
No. I want to highlight all the help that LASA, HACLA provides, even despite a shortage of staff. LACTA, LASA, amazing. I love LASA. I think that's my number one favorite, but I gotta state, even at my the clinic that I get to work at, we are on a skeleton crew, and it is due to COVID. We had more retirements than ever recorded in history during COVID with our organization, which is a little over 50 years old here in the city of Los Angeles. So I really believe in collaborative effort. And my bottom line is, and I didn't create this, but someone told me once, Gail, the more hands that we have on an individual or in families, the better the outcome. So I want to build rapport. I want, most importantly, to build healthy relationships with everyone. And I want to highlight self-care, because when I put myself first and I take good care of myself, and by the way, tomorrow's my 66th birthday, and I get to work with the homeless population today. And I love the transformation that occurs. I'm going to share this one in particular, in a wheelchair, and now getting housed into his own little house with not one, but two caregivers. And he's now experiencing joy, personal happiness, personal hope, because we all need it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. And happy birthday, Gail. Someone in the chat requested that we repeat the 3 areas that we were talking about, and Melissa added that into the chat, but just for everyone's benefit, I wanted to mention those again. So the current housing element identifies that accessible housing units in LA tend to be concentrated in downtown LA, in neighborhoods just west of downtown, and in parts of the San Fernando Valley. So those were the 3 geographies we referenced.
Serena has her hand up.
Yes, I do want to mention too that I know we look at disabilities in terms of mental and physical disability, but sometimes we miss the blind, the visually impaired. They're disabled as well. And a lot of them aren't able to find the accessible housing to accommodate them, or the resources that is needed for that population. I think also with the issues pertaining to persons with disability and whether they have access to different things, it seems like a lot of the accessibility housing is like in certain areas, but it's not in other communities where there are lower poverty areas. So even providing that to help folks move into other areas where there are these types of resources, or more so, or more access, better healthcare, maybe perhaps better food places, better schools scoring, good jobs. So I think there is some issues there. It's almost like you are like redlining. It's like somewhat of a redlining situation, because many of those folks in those areas are connected to providers that mostly help them and provide the supportive services in their area, or they may have access to certain different types of resources. The other thing I wanted to point out is, although if there may be an option for, or something, the city to incentivize landlords to make their units accessible. We understand that units are being built for accessibility, but if they're not out there or rarely available, how about incentivizing landlords to make their units accessible for a person with a disability? So if someone is applying for a unit and maybe they need grab bars or maybe they need a ramp, so that they can live in that unit, maybe that could be an option to for the landlord to provide an accessible option for them.
Good. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Serena. Good ideas. We've only got maybe a little less than 10 minutes really for the discussion portion of our meeting. So I'm going to move us to maybe one last question. And I'll point out too, just remind you that there is that SurveyMonkey form. So if you wanted to go back to any of the questions we already asked and provide a written response to that, maybe Madison can add that into the chat again, so it's handy. But one last question for you. Are there any housing projects you can think of that best exemplify how to meet the needs of households with disabilities? Where has that been done and been done really well? It could be a model maybe for other sorts of developments or programs. And again, as some of you have mentioned, we're thinking here too about physical, mental, developmental, and intellectual disabilities. So that whole spectrum. Jean, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you so much. In San Diego, we have some incredible best practice examples, which unfortunately we have not yet been able to mimic here in Los Angeles, but it's something that we should keep advocating for, as I will. We have low income and no income senior housing developers throughout San Diego. The first one that comes to mind, although there are more, is Wakeland Housing. They're also in the process of bringing 2 more of their 4 properties here in Los Angeles. But in San Diego, they partner or collaborate with the program of all-inclusive care for the elderly that serves clients who are older adults or dependent adults in their home throughout their entire lifetime as part of their health insurance. They're like a mini managed care organization, and clients who normally would be screened out of housing because of the lack of housing to support someone who needs help taking a shower or using the restroom or getting dressed, those doors are wide open to those clients, and it's extraordinary opportunity. And it's Wakeland Housing and other low and no income housing providers in San Diego have done it best with the program of all-inclusive care for the elderly, which in San Diego, the one I'm referring to, is called St. Paul's.
Very good. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. What other examples come to mind? Housing for these populations that has been done really well and could be a model, something we could learn from. Gail has added quite a few to the chat, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Gail. Are there others that anybody wants to mention? Okay, if not, I might squeeze in one last question then. I didn't think we'd have time to add it, but I think we can. If we just touch on this one quickly, this was the last one that we wanted to ask, and that is, how well known are fair housing laws and resources, including those related to accessible housing, among City of LA residents and members of the housing industry? How can we expand knowledge of those types of laws, regulations, opportunities, topics? Carrie.
So my sample may not be representative because there are people who somehow got my number, but for the most part, there seems to be a very broad understanding in a kind of a jailhouse lawyer type of way, where there's an understanding that I have these laws. Like specifically, someone mentioned earlier, maybe a few people, that one of the biggest things that people see is discrimination with regard to assistance animals. And so just about everyone I talk to, both landlord and tenant, seem to know about the law. but sometimes they're a little confused about certain, I don't want to say minutia because that underscores the importance, but certain details that are important, that aren't minutia. So there's a very much a broad awareness that people have rights to service animals and assistance and emotional support animals, but some overconfidence in thinking that they totally understand it, both on the part of tenants and landlords.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful to have that pointed out. Thank you.
Jeremy, I wanted to share something that Gil put in the chat earlier, that there's a need to educate more property managers about the laws for all target populations, but especially laws related to discrimination, kind of a need for public announcements and collaboration amongst folks.
Great, yeah. Lucia?
So this is somewhat tangentially related, but I think most landlords and property owners in LA are getting their training and information from attorneys who represent landlords. And so the training they receive isn't from an advocate or a neutral party, but usually a landlord attorney that is, has the interest of landlords. And some of these trainings that like I've attended, they'll say things like, oh, if you don't want Section 8 voucher tenants, then you should do month-to-month leases only because Section 8 will require at least a 1-year lease up. So things like that. So I think to the extent neutral parties, like maybe even the city, can provide trainings to landlords, because I think at this point they're mostly getting their information from their attorneys or landlord attorneys.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
So trainings and webinars are provided to landlords by the housing department. And that is something that is done by our rent division staff. So that is something that does take place.
I was going to share Ivy's comment from the chat, a need for wider language translation of materials and in-person outreach. And also that she has heard from people who've approached LAHD for clarity or support, but weren't helped or didn't get the support they needed for kind of unclear reasons. Thanks for sharing that, Ivy.
Doris, I see your hand. You may be our last one for this discussion, so you'll get the last word. Go ahead.
Okay, so for us, we've been successful for our tenants in utilizing the Housing Rights Center. They have workshops for landlords and for tenants. They've come to our agency and provided training for us. And then they have like office hours so that either the tenant or the landlord can go in. And I'm pretty sure they're funded through the jurisdiction. So just feedback for City of LA that we do use them. Our office is in Alhambra. They have a contract there as well, and they're at the public library on Friday afternoons or something like that, so you can go by and get your question answered. I think they're most often used by us for eviction prevention and questions about does the landlord have to make this modification or accommodation.
Okay. Well, thank you, Doris. And thank you everyone who has participated and had things to share either on screen or in the chat. It's been great to hear your input. So thank you for that. We're going to go over now. I'm going to turn it back over to Melissa, but there are other ways to continue to share input besides or beyond this meeting. So we'll cover those. But thank you again.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. And thank you everyone that participated in that discussion. We really appreciate all of your input, and truly what we're getting from you is going to help to make this study stronger and communicate to the city and housing authority what priorities and strategies this Los Angeles should focus on over the next several years. So thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us today. And I know there were some notes in the chat that we didn't have a chance to read out loud. We had a lot of discussion happening, but we do have a record of all those, and we'll include them alongside everything that we spoke about. So thanks for providing the input that you did there as well. We hope that you will continue to stay involved with our project. You can see that web address there, housing.lacity.org /residents/assessment of fair housing, with dashes in between assessment of fair housing. So you'll see there videos from the community meetings that happened last year, as well as we'll soon be posting videos from the consultation sessions that we've been holding this March. As well as the study goes on, that will be the place to learn about new ways to stay involved and to see drafts of the report. On the website, you will also see a couple links for surveys that we have open. One is for organization representatives. So like a lot of you folks that have been in the meeting, we hope you will take that one. The second is for community members. So anyone living or working in LA, it's available in 7 different languages. So if you have an opportunity to share that with clients, customers, residents, neighbors, colleagues, anyone that you think may be interested in sharing their ideas, we would really appreciate it. If it's something you might feel comfortable posting on your social media or your organization's social media, anything you can do to help us get the word out, we appreciate. Also, if there's any reason that you would like to receive some hard copies, you could email lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org. We know there are some groups that it might be easier to take a survey in hard copy than online. We'd be happy to print and ship you some of those surveys if you have an opportunity to share them with folks, maybe at other meetings you might be going to or your organization might be having. We're happy to help in that in any way we can. And now I'll turn it over to Nancy.
Yes, so we are encouraging all of you to stay involved in the city's assessment of fair housing development process. We truly appreciate all of the input and feedback that you provided today. It has been valuable, and we want this to continue going forward. I'll just reiterate a few things that Melissa mentioned. We would like for you to continue to visit the Assessment of Fair Housing webpage that we have, just to stay up to date on all of our activity. This is the place that we're going to be posting updates and key information as we're moving forward. So you can stay up to date by visiting that site. And then if you haven't done so already, we are encouraging you to complete the stakeholder survey as those who are providers to residents in the city. So we really want to get your feedback through the survey, which is also on our webpage. So please fill that out when you get a chance. And since you registered for this current meeting, you are part of our email list. So we will be able to provide you with assessment of fair housing updates through email because you're part of our list. And if you have any additional ideas to share after today, feel free to email us at lahd.afhpolicy@lacity.org or complete the Survey Monkey that was mentioned and will also be shared with you later in follow-up. We are also asking that you help to spread the word about our work. So if others you know who are interested, the others who are in your field or even clients in which you serve, if they're interested in receiving project updates, please let them know they can request to be added to our email list by sending an email to our project email address and requesting to be added. All they need to do is email us with their email address and they'll be part of our list. And with that, I just want to end by saying we thank you for taking time to participate in today's Assessment of Fair Housing discussion. And again, we hope you stay connected. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.